Good morning. John and I are so excited to be here with you today at the Gospel Coalition Conference. And before we dive in, I just want to be super clear about something. John is not a pastor. I am not a pastor. We're not professional ministry consultants. We're not even people who have all of this figured out. What we are is the result of what we're presenting today. We're both lay leaders and volunteers who were mobilized. We were, at one time, sitting in the pews. We loved our church, we loved our church family, our community, our pastors, we loved Jesus. We're willing to help, but we weren't leading. We weren't owning anything. And we weren't certainly thinking of ourselves as leaders in the church. But then something happened. Someone invited us into something more. We were asked to step up, and we were given ownership into a part of the mission. And over time, we moved from simply showing up and helping into leading with purpose, with clarity, and with joy. So if you're here today and you're asking, how do we get more people involved? How do we lighten the load without lowering the bar? How do we raise up leaders, not just hands and volunteers? Well, you're absolutely in the right place, because that's what the Nehemiah Way is all about. It's about turning everyday church-goers into engaged, empowered, mission-minded, and mobilized leaders. And we're not here to tell you a theory, any ivory tower. We're here to tell you that it does work and how it works. So the big question that we're wrestling with today is, how do you move people from the sidelines into the front lines? How do you take faithful, capable, gifted people who are already showing up every week and help them to step into ownership and leadership and own the mission of your church? Because every one of us has people in the pews or chairs who love Jesus, who love you as their pastors, who love the local church, and they're willing to help, but they're not leading. They haven't been invited into something bigger. And that's where we land today. We believe that the church does not have a volunteer problem. It has a mobilization opportunity. That's why we wrote the Nehemiah Way. It's not a theory, it's a framework that we've lived. And we're convinced of this: mobilizing lay people into leaders rather than managing volunteers is the key to building a joy-filled, gospel-advancing church. And the story of Nehemiah gives us a blueprint of how ordinary people can be invited and equipped and empowered to own the mission and lead with purpose in your local church. That's what we're going to unpack together today. So let's talk for a minute about the people who are sitting in their pews. We all have them. You already have faces that are popping into your mind as I say this. And we'll call them Pew Potatoes. And let's be clear, Pew Potatoes are not bad people. Actually, they're usually really wonderful people. They love Jesus, they love God, they love your church, they love their family and the church family, and they're willing to help when asked. But here's the thing, they're present, but they're passive. They're gifted, but underutilized. They're willing, but not yet leading. They're folks who show up every Sunday, and they serve on occasion, but they haven't been invited into ownership, and they're not fully engaged in your mission, the mission of your church. And most of the time, they don't even know that there's something more that they can step into. So let's contrast that with what we'll call mission mobilizers. These are people who aren't just attending church, they're building it. They're committed to the mission. They're relational, initiative-taking, and accountable. They don't need to be asked every time. They take responsibility, they step up and lead. They're the ones who say, this is my church, and I have a role to play in what God is doing here. Here's the key. The difference between a pew potato and a mission mobilizer is not personality. It's not even gifting. It is mobilization. It's a shift in mindset. It's an invitation into ownership. It's having a framework that helps people move into leadership, sometimes for the very first time. Once upon a time, John and I are standing here as living proof of that shift. We didn't see ourselves as leaders way back at the beginning, but someone saw something in us, invited us into the mission, gave us space and the equipping and the empowerment to lead. And that's what we're here to cast vision for you and envision you for what your church can be. And let's be honest for a second about the challenge that is involved here. Most churches struggle because they don't have a plan to mobilize the people that they already have. And we've all heard about the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. It's really common. A lot of people are even just hoping for warm bodies that will fill the gap. But the goal of this presentation is not to get more volunteers. It's to raise up leaders, because volunteers say, I'll help. But leaders say, I'll own it. And this shift from volunteerism to ownership is the transformation that we're hoping for. And we're not talking about names on a sign-up genius. We're talking about identifying and activating leaders that God has already placed in your church, and people he's equipped for the work who haven't yet been asked to lead. And when this happens, something powerful shifts and will shift in your church, because it's not just your structure, your team structure, but it's your entire church culture. So take a minute to think of where you are currently on the mobilization spectrum. Are you in that 80-20 group? Think about your church. Are 20% of the people doing 80% of the work? Maybe you're in crisis mode, which is like 10% of the people doing 100% of the work. Maybe your church is a little bit further along. Maybe you have 30%. So are you a 30-70? Are you a 50-50? Where are you? And maybe just jot it in your notes. Where do you find yourself today? But the good news is that no matter where you are on that mobilization spectrum, there is a way forward, and that's what we're unpacking together today. So I'm going to tell you a story for a minute of what mobilization can look like. And I'll tell you about Kenny. Kenny is the senior pastor in our town, in our small church that was a very small church, a church plant that began growing into a mid-sized church. And for 10 years, Kenny and two fellow pastors did everything. Kenny, Jason, and David, they did it all. They preached, they led Bible studies, they married people, they buried people, they went to graduation parties, they counseled the struggling marriages, they managed crises, they ran big events, they had meetings every night of the week. And then when the church was growing and began to grow in towards 400 people, with 400 wonderful people, so increased the weight of ministry. With 400 people came 400 sets of needs and marital struggles and financial stresses and relational drama and criticism and expectations and lots of wonderful things, the baby showers, the baptisms and birthday invites. But after about 10 years, they started to hit a wall, and the passion was there, but the energy wasn't. There was a growing weariness and a threatening burnout. And that's when enter Sarah. Sarah was a church member. We all knew that she had administrated a college, she had administrative skills, but nobody really knew how skilled Sarah really was until she was invited in. But she didn't just volunteer. She started leading. She began implementing systems. She began building a team. She began organizing people into teams. She took real ownership of real problems and parts of the church's organization, and everything began to change. For the first time, Kenny, David, and Jason weren't doing everything. Other people were stepping up. And then they began to realize something. This church is not short on gifted people. It was short on mobilized people. So they started looking for more Sarahs, and they found them. Anthony took over the finances. Ralph handled the building maintenance. Mary did the bookkeeping. Amy, that's me, took over the church communication. Vicki managed the graphics. Amanda took guest initiatives and guest connections. Jeff spearheaded all the creative projects. Allie and Diane took over the landscaping. And suddenly, it wasn't just a few staff members holding everything together. It was a church full of leaders, each owning their part of the mission and building teams. That's what mobilization looks like. It didn't just lighten the load, it transformed the church. Because when people move from passive participation into active ownership, the church doesn't just get more efficient. The church gets stronger, and it gets even better. The strength grows exponentially. And Kenny, he didn't just survive ministry burnout. He started leading with joy once again. Now, I'm married to him, and I'm a witness. So what was the effect on Kenny? He used to walk into church with a to-do list that was so long, it was utterly impossible to ever see the end of it. Everything was on his shoulders. What's broken? What's missing? Who's angry? Who's critical? Who's upset? What didn't get done this week? But after mobilization, things shifted. Now, Sarah was no longer looking and waiting for direction. She was leading. Anthony had built a team, a financial team. So the finances were healthy and they were projecting and working into the future with full transparency for the church. Ralph fixed what was broken before anybody noticed it was broken, and then had a team planning for what the next things were, the roof, the HVAC, planning for that. Mary balanced the books and kept them balanced, and then took on the medical benefits of the staff members. And I took over the communications. And so what we used to have as a newsletter, which was a Google Doc emailed to us, became like an awesome church weekly email with a 70% open rate, because I'm really good at what I do. And Vicki took our graphics to a whole new level. And John was teaching and coaching the team in organizational leadership and best practices. And Kenny, well, he walked into church way lighter. For the first time in years, he had margin to do what he was really called to do, to pray, to preach, to shepherd the people, and to cast vision for the church. Instead of holding everything together with bubble gum and duct tape, he watched his church functioning like a body, with every part doing its work. So people weren't just helping, they were owning the mission, and that changed everything. Now, this is the outcome that we long to see for all of you and for your churches, because when leaders step up and lead, pastors don't burn out, they thrive. The church doesn't just survive, it begins to flourish. And that's the case for us in our church in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, in Brandywine Grace Church. We're thriving, we're flourishing, and we're growing. So the question becomes, how do you get there? How do you move from burnout to joy? From having a handful of helpers into a culture of leaders? From good intentions to real mobilization? You are already surrounded by potential leaders. You just haven't tapped into them yet. And here's the hope. This isn't guesswork. There is a blueprint, because what Kenny in our church has experienced, what John and I have lived out, is exactly what we see in the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah didn't start with a dream team. He started with a scattered, unorganized group of people, just like the ones that are in your church and my church. But by the time the work was done, they weren't just a rabble crowd. They were a team. They were builders. They were leaders. They were mission mobilizers.